in quite a number of countries. In recent years, the strengthened regulations have had a very demonstrable impact in curbing corruption and other economic crimes.
I think we were probably the first jurisdiction to introduce really draconian legislation. And it was thought that the end justified the means. The problem was so acute that it really needed something out of the ordinary to be done. In 1972, the Prevention of Bribery Ordinance was passed by the Legislative Council and became law. And the United Kingdom followed suit, but much, much later. I think it wasn't until 2010 that the UK Bribery Act became law.
As the full title of FCPA suggests, which is Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, it is a piece of US legislation to combat corruption. It was enacted in the US in 2007, but has both a civil and a criminal remedies. Its major objective is to prevent corruption to overseas officials. Even though it's a piece of US legislation, it does have a very important far-reaching effect, particularly in respect of cooperation with overseas regulatory and investigation authorities.
The Holy Grail is a standardized compliance program for any international organization, because it gives everybody a level of comfort that they are complying with everything, and particularly people at head office like to know that the very far reaches of the organization are following group standard. That is easier said than done, and the key challenge is that every market is different. Every country has different regulations, and local regulations, using this region as an example, may not be to the same level as the UK regulations. The goal of any regulator is to be proactive, of course. Much like I'm sure the fire department wants to prevent fires rather than respond to them. But of course regulation changes daily, hourly. In fact, I heard somewhere recently that there's a new regulation coming out every 10 minutes or something, which is a staggering amount of regulation for people to comply with.
There's no single piece of legislation of anti-corruption in the world that's being implemented, because country A might have an interpretation of corruption. Country B might have a different meaning of corruption. And the culture also varies a lot.
A lot of people will say that corruption in Asia has a very long history, that it's part of the culture there and so on. And I would agree that it's been there for many centuries. But it's not the only part of the world that has corruption. We have corruption in Europe and America too, and in South America and in Russia. So that's not the whole story.
In-house strategies for combating bribery and corruption, so your anti-bribery and compliance program, are pretty standard across the financial industry. Again, there's different levels of maturity depending on the size, depending on previous issues, etc. That's really the easy part. The difficult part is then communicating and rolling that out across a big organization, and there are many factors that make that difficult or easy depending on your organization, your geographic footprint, language, culture, internal culture, how you communicate internally, how much change needs to be socialized before it gets adopted, or can it just be something that's sort of sent out. So there are challenges. The bigger you are, the more geographically spread you are, the more challenging it'll be.